Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very accomplished branding, marketing, and strategy professional from Mumbai, India, Kruti Berawala. Kruti, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ashutosh. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Kruti is the co-founder of Stratedgy. Um, I hope I have the pronunciation right because you have a D in the strategy.
That's silent.
It's correct. Okay. So, Kruti, before we get into strategy and design thinking, tell me a little bit about your own journey and what was the motivation to start Stratedgy?
Oh, that's interesting. We started this in 2009, actually, me and my co-founder Aniket. So honestly, it was we were children, right? We were 20 and there was nothing to lose. But what we felt was in terms of the gap that we actually wanted to do another business. And when we wanted to find people, we found that, the ones who were sort of working at the core level of the business and then sort of doing the design and the comms were also agencies that were really out of our reach. And then the other ones were sort of giving us vector graphics. And, that time, this was the industry was a little like that. So we ended up hiring a team to sort of do this ourselves in our NIVET. And we realized this was something that we really enjoy.
Right.
So the other business never took off. And then this one was something that we said, okay, you know what, we'll pivot. And I think at that age, frankly, it's just audacity is easy, right? Because you don't know better.
Correct.
So I think we ended up sort of doing this, and then we enjoyed this so much that we said okay. And I did study advertising, so it's I had some sense of what all of this was, but I think we really did learn along the way.
Well said. So my knowledge of branding is from a dinosaur period. I'm 68 years old. So I wanted to ask you my first question, which is what is the process of developing a brand strategy at Stratedgy?
Okay. I think, firstly, I think our process is a lot of fun because it involves a lot of research. There are lots of workshops, there are exercises. So typically, say, you come to me and you say, okay, let's build something with chocolate, right? Or whatever, coffee, whatever. So we'll first try and talk to people, right? And I think that part is the most fun because when you're talking to consumers, you're not just asking them which coffee, which chocolate, which whatever do you prefer. You sort of get into the whys and stuff like that. And we kind of do this in a very interesting way where we do this offline. We also kind of try and, of course, look at data and trends and all of that. But we do a lot of this in the real world, right? So then it's not just you filling in an Insta survey. That could be one thing that you do, but there's also a lot of like getting into the deep reasons behind why you prefer something. What are your complaints? What are your frustrations? All of that.
Right.
Now, after that is done, right, you can then kind of take all of that data, look at it, analyze it. And then there is a lot of secondary data. There's also information available online, right? So then you sort of marry all of that together. And we essentially try to find the deeper reason behind things and then take that and form the crux of the strategy. And then after that, you kind of look at this that, okay, how can I marry a decent communication strategy to this? And all of this then comes together to form the brand strategy. A big part of this is also the founders, right? So I mean, we always say that you got to start with the why, right? Like Simon Sinek said. So you kind of then do a lot of workshops with the founders also. It's very interesting to do this a little sort of after we've spoken to the consumers, because so many times founders have an idea of what consumers think, but it might not be a complete idea, right? So then you have sort of insights and you have data to back up what you're saying. And then, sort of you create that brand vision together. So I think typically that's where we start. And then, of course, you manifest that vision through design. So then design is generally stage 4 or 5 in our process. It comes in much, much later.
Yeah. Great response. Thank you. The other very interesting thing I've often asked this from people like you in different firms is India is such a diverse market geographically and culturally. How do you tailor a brand strategy for different cultural or regional markets?
Okay. Very interesting question. So, what we've observed in the last few years, and it's probably true for our country more so than maybe some other place, is that we're different geographically, but a lot of our sentiments could resonate, right? So when we look at, say, a brand needs to resonate with a certain set of consumers, it's about that psychographic set. It's not always about, oh, people in this region versus this region. So at the research stage, what you're trying to understand is what is unifying the emotions behind this category in a certain way, and then you kind of tailor the brand for it, because we are probably a bunch of small and large countries in one country, right? So to understand that, what is at a broad level working with people, and then you get into the whys and things like that, and then one tailors a strategy. But in some cases we might say that overall this is what the brand is saying, but say culturally you got to tailor the communication to a certain segment possibly. So maybe let's say if data says that this aspect for a certain category works in this region, then our recommendation to the founder would be that when you're communicating about this product at that level, maybe you tweak the communication strategy accordingly.
Right.
But overall, the promise of a brand needs to sort of resonate with the larger set.
Well said. And the other thing, Kruti, is that a lot of founders know that they've got a great product, but they have no idea are not very clear on how to build a brand or create a brand identity.
Yeah.
How do you approach building this brand identity with clients who don't have a clear vision?
So a lot of the people who work with us, we're very fortunate perhaps that it's not entirely blank, right? And then we sort of will craft or maybe crystallize that vision together. Now, what sometimes happens is, like, we do a lot of work with family businesses. Now, when you're working with, say, there are probably 6-7 members across generations, right? So there are maybe multiple visions. So a lack of vision, I haven't encountered so much at my level, but perhaps there's a broad vision, and you kind of do a few workshops, exercises, you help them chisel it. And then in the case of too many people with too many ideas and too many vision statements, I think a little bit of sort of justifying your recommendation, or sort of doing a lot of conversations with all of them together in a room. Maybe there'll be more workshops than a single founder, but I think that way you can sort of arrive at a vision. But also, I think one of the things that is interesting in the kind of work we do, especially with like family businesses and all, is that they're very willing to learn. So we're very fortunate in a way that, of course, it's our job to educate the client, but I mean, there's only, like, the horse needs to come to the water, right? So I think what's good with the founders that we've worked with is they're willing to learn. I think only in the cases where they don't want to learn is where you feel that, okay, this vision isn't really going anywhere. But otherwise, I think coaching them with workshops and things like that, you get to crystallize that vision easily.
Well said. And would you be able to give me an example of any brand you have helped to pivot or adapt to new challenges? And if it's confidential, don't give any names.
No, I can give you a name. I think it's a name that also most of India knows. We did a lot of work with Bagris.
Okay.
Now, it's a family-run business, and when we were working with Aditya, he's Mr. Aditya Bagri.
Yeah.
So I think what was interesting is that they were already sort of doing very well, very, very well in the breakfast space, and they also have lots of other offerings under their brand. They decided to enter the milk alternatives category. So it was actually a personal story for the founder. His son was intolerant to gluten, dairy, and then he had to sort of he took that as an opportunity to kind of say, let's get into that. Now, it was interesting for us to sort of be on that table, because usually the brands in this category that were sort of finding their way into the consumers' hearts and minds were newer startups, and a bit of Gen Z kind of approach was happening, let's say,
Mm.
which was doing very well for them. Now, here's a legacy brand that wanted to sort of enter into this category. So it was very interesting for us to kind of help them do this, because we said, okay, we need to obviously look approachable, relatable to the consumers that are having this, but we also have a legacy that's, that's going to back our claims.
Mm.
So I think that was an interesting exercise in kind of trying to understand the cues that would work, but not shed the legacy image that Bagris comes with, right? Because that was, I mean, there's a lot of brand equity there to just ignore.
Amazing.
So that was a fun one that we did.
Mm.
And I think another one was, oh no, this one I can't say right now.
Okay. Not to worry. But I must tell you that, I use Bagri products at breakfast. So now I know the people behind Bagri also.
Yes.
Wonderful.
In fact, it was such an exciting. So we've been working with them for a few years now, right? And we started with sort of. I mean, before our refresh, I think the packs were the same for about 25 odd years. So it was interesting to say that, okay, now the consumer preferences are changing, but that balance between not entirely shedding everything for the sake of a revamp.
Correct.
I think that was a lot of fun. So we did,
Very
in fact,
interesting.
all their categories. You might have had the granola, you might have had the muesli.
Yeah.
So yeah, we started from there and then we got to the
Fantastic. Now I'll go and check out all the other products as well. But Kruti, now moving on, let's talk about design thinking and storytelling. And my first question in this segment is, what in your view is the connection between strategic design and impactful storytelling when it comes to branding?
Okay. So I think one of the things that we really believe is that differentiation for the sake of differentiation doesn't mean anything, right? I mean, our job is to kind of ensure that the bottom line of the brand is impacted in a positive way. So the way we look at this is that the story needs to first sort of resonate with the consumer that it's trying to talk to. It need not necessarily always be a new story. It needs to be a story that works for that consumer, right? So I think one of the things that we do at the strategy level is to, like I said earlier, is to understand the motivations, the pain points, and all of that.
Yeah.
Then sometimes you get to sort of weave this into a whole new narrative, or you get to sort of present an existing narrative with a new lens. So depending on the context, and also a lot of times, brands have a certain level of storytelling that they've already done, right? So sometimes you got to sort of marry that into what you're doing. Sometimes you get to sort of weave a whole new picture. So it depends on what the context is.
Right. And the next question for you is that how do you ensure that the design doesn't just focus on aesthetics, but also functionality and strategy?
Right. So like design is stage 4 for us anyway, right? So strategy and all of that comes first. Your messaging, tone, all of that is done way before one starts design. So, we always say that we design, we don't decorate, right? So we're not here to sort of just make something look pretty. The first thing we got to do is that, listen, this has to connect. So once that process is in place, then it's very hard to sort of forego the strategic aspects, right? Because they are the first things that you sort of put on paper.
And how do you involve your client in the design thinking process so that their vision is reflected in the final outcome?
So I think one of the fun things about, I think, this process is that the client gets a seat on the table from the beginning, right? So in fact, even in consumer emotions, the clients are involved at every stage with workshops. Sometimes, say, if I'm even making a discussion guide, right? It's something that the client is aware of, because they need to know the motivations behind why I'm asking what I'm asking.
Right.
If they're involved from that stage, right? When it comes to the final brand strategy, we'll obviously co-create it with them and their vision and things like that. After that, at the design stage, then the clients usually give you a lot of autonomy, because they've also seen how you think all this while. They've also understood that, okay, you know what you're doing and things like that. So at that stage, they generally let you be in the driver's seat, and in most cases, they'll go with what you're recommending. And another thing is that they've also heard the consumer side of things. So at that stage, I don't really have to coach them or educate them into, this is the motivation of your consumer. They pretty much have been a part of all of this. And then they'll generally come in for workshops, or, we'll sort of do fun exercises with them to arrive at your vision and to arrive at all these smaller aspects, like in the beginning. So I think that sort of helps them be on board throughout.
Okay. The other perspective I wanted from you, Kruti, was the impact of technology on all the work that you're doing, and it's impacting a lot of agencies. What do you think is the future of design thinking and brand storytelling when you look at it from a perspective of an AI driven world?
Okay. I think AI is not a threat.
Okay.
Okay. And these are my thoughts today.
Yeah.
I don't know about tomorrow.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think the way we look at, okay, for example, design softwares, right? Before design softwares came in, or before online research came in, people were doing these things in an offline way, right? And then sort of when all of this came in, they understood the tools, they learned it, and now they're sort of using it in a more productive way.
Yeah.
So the way I look at AI is that it's a tool, right? I mean, for example, just I see a lot of people writing things on ChatGPT, right?
Yeah.
The prompt that I will give, because I know the consumer, because I know what they're thinking, I know their frustrations, or my methods of even finding their frustrations out, right? Like even if I'm doing secondary research, the way I think and a strategist's mind would work versus, let's say, a client decides to do this on their own, right? So I look at AI as something that will probably help me do my job better. It could also mean that it will weed out the the ones who are just faffing their way through it, right? Because then they're not needed anymore. So I'm particularly not very threatened by AI. I think I'm excited about it. Like, let's see where this can go.
Well said. Well said. So, Kruti, we've now spoken about two legs of strategy, which is brand strategy and design thinking and storytelling. And I want to come to the third leg, which is communication research. And that's a very critical aspect of any strategy, especially when it comes to marketing. And my first question for you in communication research is, how do you approach research when working with brands from diverse industries?
Okay. So with regards to any project, right? I think one of the good things about being in the internet age today is that there's a lot of information available online. It's about how you distill that information, right? So the first step is, of course, doing your secondary research and just understanding the landscape at a broader level. Then, depending on the context, you would either start with qual and then sort of distill that information and then either validate it through quantitative. In some cases, you might just do quantitative studies first and then sort of pick a certain theme and then let's delve deeper into that through qual. So depending on the context of that product and that market, you could take either of these. Sometimes we also do testing, right? And that's the good thing with again, like with the internet, because social media allows you to test things. You also get to sort of it's very interesting to read consumer comments. So in fact, we do a lot of this sort of reading between the lines, understanding that is this a theme between people for who are buying brand A versus brand B. What is it that people are really thinking, and what are some of the pain points, or what are some of the joyous things that they're sort of articulating. So I think research done in this manner, at the end of this, you get to sort of crystallize that, okay, this is what people have assumed about this category. This is what, where probably we can come in and solve a problem. So I think that's very interesting about how research shapes brand strategy.
And how has the digital landscape changed the way you conduct and apply research?
It's actually made it faster.
Okay.
So sometimes, just the other day, I wanted to, for a new project that we're doing, we wanted to get consumer insights from Tier 2 India. And I got to speak with people from Raipur and from lots of these places, sitting in our office. And, it's just made things so much cheaper, so much faster. Sometimes when we want to test something out, it's just so much easier to run a campaign online,
Right.
put some money behind it, understand what's working, what's not working.
Mm.
Sometimes, even packaging testing can be done online now. So a lot of this has actually just become faster, quicker, cheaper. Yeah.
Amazing. Kruti, we have time for two more questions. What role does consumer psychology play in your research process?
A huge role. Sometimes research is to understand what is their thinking behind something. Sometimes research is to sort of disvalidate ideas that we may have at the onset, or the founder may have come with preset notions and things like that. Also, I think what this helps us do is, on a subliminal level, create work that will connect, right? Sometimes you can't always spell things out, right? So what happens with psychology and understanding the deeper motivations or the deeper frustrations is that you can then also communicate at a subliminal level. And that's when you build a brand that sort of connects. Like even systems, right? Like a brand is not a logo, right? So then there are so many other things that you can do.
Yep.
So let's say I have understood a bunch of important touch points in terms of why this will connect with a client. I can use different facets of the brand to sort of weave that in a way that is positive for the brand. So having that understanding, in fact, in our team there are like ethnographers, and there are people who just study consumer behavior and kind of get into the 5 whys and the 10 whys and all of that. So I think that does play a very deep role. We, in fact, when we were working on this oral care brand that we built a few years ago, it's called Perfora. And it's very interesting because it's like a David versus Goliath situation, right? They're trying to be the next Colgate. Now, when we sort of understood the way consumers were thinking, the solution was to sort of present this as a lifestyle more than, like, if you look at Colgate, there's a lot of maa ka bharosa, doctor ka bharosa, there's a lot of all that.
Yeah.
So we said, how else can we connect with the consumer? So when we understood the psychology behind, what people were thinking at that point, Perfora is a brand that, is very science backed. It talks to you at your lifestyle level. The packaging that we created sort of looks like skincare, really. And that's what it is. It's an extension of, like, people are already converted and paying a lot of attention to skincare.
Right.
That kind of attention wasn't being given to oral care.
Wow.
So when you understand the deeper motivation, so the manifestation of that consumer psychology was that Perfora looks the way it looks. It kind of speaks the way it speaks. It's very witty, it's funny, it's humorous. It's also very very relatable. So I think that is a good example to tell you that, how consumer psychology plays into brand strategy.
Fascinating. Great response. And my last question for you, Kruti, how do you balance qualitative and quantitative research when you are formulating a strategy?
So this is very contextual, right? Like I said, that sometimes I may have a bunch of, like, quant will give you the larger lay of the land.
Yeah.
And then you sort of say, okay, fine, this is broadly what, our observations are. Now let's sort of figure out how to sort of narrow this down through qual. Sometimes you may say that, this is too crowded a category. We'll do qual first, and then we'll validate it from a subset of, let's say I want to appeal to this particular TG, then the validation of qual happens through quant. So it is very contextual.
Well said. And on that note, Kruti, just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about your journey. I think we covered a lot of ground when we were talking about 3 different aspects of your firm's strategy. We spoke about brand strategy. We spoke about branding and strategy in different cultural and regional markets. I loved the example you gave me of Bagris. As I mentioned, I am a user. I'm going to go and start checking out some of the other products. We also spoke at some length about strategic design and storytelling. And you were very, I love the way you just said that you view AI as, you don't see it as a threat at all. You also covered some very interesting ground on communication research. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you, Ashutosh. It was lovely being here. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.